The phase 2 ALTA trial looked at the utility of brigatinib in ALK-rearranged lung cancers who had prior ALK-directed TKI therapy. Brigatinib is a later generation TKI that targets many mechanisms of acquired resistance to earlier generation therapy with crizotinib, meaning on-target mutations that might emerge with treatment. And so it's no surprise that this drug was active in this trial with a response rate that exceeded 40%. And a really good progression-free survival compared to some of the other TKIs. And so because of this, brigatinib is now currently approved by the FDA as a second line of therapy for patients with ALK-rearranged lung cancers who previously received crizotinib.
In July 2018, we currently have 4 approved ALK inhibitors in the United States. The first generation inhibitor, crizotinib, and 3 second generation ALK inhibitors, ceritinib, alectinib, and brigatinib. The historical paradigm was to start with crizotinib, which induced high response rates, followed by use of a second generation ALK inhibitor, such as ceritinib, alectinib, and brigatinib. The second generation inhibitors are generally characterized by increased potency compared to crizotinib, increased selectivity, and better CNS penetration. All 3 of those second generation inhibitors are currently approved in the United States for use after crizotinib. As I mentioned earlier, alectinib, though, is also approved in the first-line use based upon the ALK study, and ceritinib is also approved for the first-line use. Together, though, I would consider that alectinib is really the standard of care first-line, putting together the data from the ALK study with impressive activity combined with CNS penetrability and a favorable safety profile. Nonetheless, there are a number of patients who are currently still on crizotinib in the United States or receiving crizotinib in other areas of the world. And so it is very much a question of, if patients have started with crizotinib, what should be the preferred next second generation ALK inhibitor? There are currently no head-to-head comparisons across the second generation ALK inhibitors, so we're generally left with cross-trial comparisons. The most recent drug that was approved in this space is brigatinib, another second generation inhibitor that has shown very high response rates, and in the crizotinib resistant setting has shown impressive progression-free survival, around 15 to 16 months in the latest update. And so based upon that impressive data, brigatinib is now being explored in the first-line space with a head-to-head comparison against crizotinib, and I think we'll eagerly await that data. Finally, the question is, what do we do for patients who are progressing on first-line alectinib, which I argued was the new standard of care? We have the agent that has the most data in that setting is still an experimental agent. This is a so-called third-generation ALK inhibitor, lorlatinib, which was granted breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA. And that was based upon encouraging response rates among patients who are treated with 1, 2, and even 3 prior ALK inhibitors. And so that's an agent that has shown activity in the post-alectinib setting, and if approved, would be an option in that setting.
Alectinib is currently the standard of care for ALK-rearranged lung cancers. And because we've moved one of our better drugs into the first-line setting, the question becomes what to use after that. I think there are 2 potential options in terms of TKI therapy, like brigatinib and lorlatinib, that do have very broad coverage against possible on-target resistance mechanisms. but it's still not very clear what the response rate is going to be like when we treat more patients. I think that until we have definite FDA approval for another TKI after alectinib, beyond exploring one of these TKIs on either a clinical trial or if we're able to prescribe it for patients, a very viable option is to, after alectinib, consider giving patients chemotherapy plus minus immunotherapy.